The push for Winnipeg's future continues, and the trade rumors continue to heat up while the Winnipeg Jets continue to lose ground in the standings.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us in tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. We've got a lot to chat about today, obviously. Winnipeg, over the weekend, lost to the Red Wings in a pretty rough game. Arniel was pretty furious. Want to talk through why he might have been pissed despite an effort that kind of in a lot of ways looked all right, but maybe there were details that were missing. Also want to chat about some of the intriguing trade rumors, some of which should be very exciting for Jets fans, some of which might be a little disconcerting. Finally, I also want to redefine what people hear when they hear us talk about the tank, right? It is not necessarily something that is intentional, but I think a lot of folks believe that we might be asking folks to quit. And perhaps in some ways, we're looking at the front office for this, but certainly when it comes to the players and coaches, that's not what you want to see from the team. We'll dive into a little bit more about that and what we mean in just a little bit. But before we dive into everything tonight, of course, let's start off with Detroit versus Winnipeg. This was a game that on paper, I didn't really see a lot that was awful for most of the game, right? I thought in a lot of respects, it was a very back and forth, very even affair. Detroit is a pretty good team, right? And if you make a mistake against guys like Raymond or Larkin, players of that caliber, you are going to be punished. And for most of the game, the Jets, they did have some puck management issues. And I think the Red Wings definitely stressed them a good bit. Detroit's puck movement and I think their zone transitions were a bit better than what the Jets did. But it was fairly even and back and forth for most of the game. At some point, Detroit took a 2-1 lead, and you thought, okay, well, that's within reason, right? That's not unreachable for the Jets. Winnipeg could kind of claw back in this one, especially because it was towards the start of the third period, and it wasn't like this was a high-scoring game to begin with. But then the third period began to wear on, and the Jets' mistakes started piling up. Unfortunately, you had a couple of bad moments from the third pairing. You also had the top line kind of getting cooked. There's a very infamous moment. I don't recall which goal it was. It might have been the Raymond goal or maybe the comp for the first, either the first or second comp for goal. But there was a whole chaos moment in front of the net. And Kyle Connor is just standing there marking his guy, but not really marking him. And basically did not stick his stick out, didn't physically engage, and allowed Detroit to score what was essentially just a bumble-in sort of moment. And it was kind of, a bit of a I don't want to say like a crystallization of the particular mistakes that happened in this game, but it was ugly, right? It's just not the sort of effort that you want to see. And it's why in the post-game, I think Arniel was so pissed. He basically said it was one of the most embarrassing games of the season. He said the effort was soft. People should be ashamed, blah, 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 blah. It's stuff that you've kind of heard multiple times this year. Winnipeg just wasn't very good. And I think that's, the some takeaway, for a good portion of the game, it was back and forth, and the Jets did create some solid looks and even a couple of good chances. But in those details moments, Winnipeg was bad. And that's kind of where a lot of these losses, where maybe it's been a 1-goal margin or something against other teams, where Winnipeg hasn't been able to close that gap. This time, though, it ended up kind of spiraling into a 5-1 loss. Granted, one of the goals was an empty netter, and the last one, the fifth goal, no one really cares about because, the Jets had basically kind of thrown the towel in the last couple of minutes. You were already down in a pretty deep hole. You weren't clawing back, and I think there was just some sort of stun from the empty net goal because this one came only 30 seconds later. But I just think you're not seeing some of the stuff that you saw maybe in some of the more competitive losses. The top line kind of was getting caved in. The third pairing was really struggling. I think, Morrissey and DeMello were fine. Sandberg and Salamonson, I thought, had a pretty strong outing. Salamonson in particular just looks like the future, man. He is really good. And it starts to make you wonder what happens with him next season. I think the Jets would like to fast-track him to a top pairing role. Perhaps maybe next year you slide DeMello to the third. Dylan is still capable of playing some good hockey, but you have to start to draw down his minutes as he's getting older and slower. I think in a third pairing role, DeMello might actually make a lot of sense. Have Morrissey with Salamonson. That could be a really fun pairing. I think Salamonson would understand how JMO wants to play. I think that they would have some good chemistry. And Salamonson has shown that, for one thing, he actually does not shy away from physicality. He'll win, wall battles. He'll fight for the puck. And he actually uses interior positioning pretty well, despite maybe not being the tallest player. He's defensively improving, and you see his breakout passes, his stretch passes, his zone exits and transition. He's a really clean player, and I think it lends itself well to perhaps seeing an increase in the competition. He's already doing better than I expected alongside Sandberg. So clearly, I think the coaches are seeing some of the same stuff because he's been married to Sandberg's hip so far, and it seems like a partnership that's really fruitful. It's not going to last because Pionk's coming back in the next couple of weeks, perhaps sooner than later. I don't really know. There's been no real status update on him. But Salamonson, he's doing the deed. He looks good, man. I'm happy about him. In a game where the Jets kind of got cooked in the third period, I thought Salamonson was one of the steadiest performers on the night. Also, in terms of the Jets forwards, Cole Koepke getting a hardworking, low-down goal. I really like his effort every night. He just seems to be a fighter. When he gets scratched, I actually feel a little bit like he shouldn't be. Cole is one of the guys that's consistently doing the hard work, getting into the dangerous areas. Yeah, it doesn't really lead to points all that often, but he's a good guy, right? He plays the game the right way and does his job quite well. I also thought Cole Perfetti was probably a little unlucky. He constantly does a lot of the hard work on this team, and it doesn't seem like he's always been able to get rewarded for it. He had a goal against the Panthers in an overtime loss earlier, but it just feels like, I don't know, it's been a hard season for him. Looking at his line mates, looking at how he's tried to create offense, looking at his fit where this top nine is kind of situated, it's been hard for him to find pay dirt on a consistent basis. And that's why I think his name is starting to crop up in trade rumors again, which you can probably sense I am not a real fan of that, barring some very specific circumstances. But we'll talk a little bit about that in just a bit. I think in terms of this game, this was just a little bit of a humbling reminder of where the Jets still are in, the grand scheme of things. And despite all of the, playoff pushes and stuff the Jets have tried to make over the past couple of weeks, they won several games. They're 5-3-2 in their last 10, and they're still 8th in the wild card race, right? They've really not gained enough ground to be a serious threat. Yes, they're closer to teams like the Flames and the Hawks and the Preds, but they are not really that close to a playoff spot. And I think the Jets front office is starting to kind of see the writing on the wall with this team. You're not really hearing them talking about acquiring a lot of talent to fill this roster and players who can really move the needle this season. They're starting to talk more about the future, and I think that's just the correct response. You don't have to say that you're throwing in the towel completely. We've seen teams like the Blues and some others like the Rangers really talk a little bit about retooling and stuff. Maybe you don't have to use that language, but I think you have to be a little bit honest about the direction of the team and say that, next season really is what we're building towards and how you intend to do that, both through the draft and perhaps through some really savvy transactions. I still see a way that the Jets can rebound fairly quickly, even if it's not just next season, but there's time to turn this around. I just don't think it's going to happen this year. And regardless of what anyone tries to gaslight themselves into believing, this team is what it is, right? The decisions that were made before have put them in this spot. So now it's time to figure out how to make the best of it for the coming seasons. But I want to talk a little bit more about the trade stuff because that is the imminent thing on the horizon for this team. The Olympics are coming up very soon. That's going to be our first fake trade deadline. We'll chat about why in just a brief moment. Let's be real, managing your finances can feel overwhelming. Between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month, it's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subs, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money revealed to a lot of folks, including myself, that we're spending way more on streaming services that we don't even use. It can be overwhelming. You have so many different services out there that you're using. heck, it's hard to even find the hockey games I want to watch on one streaming service, and I have to have several just to make ends meet and watch the game that I want to watch, which is crazy. Rocket Money can help you filter out the noise and figure out just how much you're actually spending to watch the sport you love. And they even have an automatic categorization for your spending, so you can see where every dollar you are spending is going, whether it's food, hospital stuff, maybe you're spending money on a few too many luxury goods, whatever it is. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for rejoining us as we're chatting a little bit about where the Jets are in terms of the upcoming trade market. And the Jets are about to enter a very busy period for a lot of teams. We're at the end of January. February is when things are going to get very crazy. Around the 3rd or 4th next week, we are going to see likely a fair few NHL transactions. Teams are going to start getting ready for what's going to be a prolonged break, right? The Olympics break is something that we haven't had in many, many, many years. We've had World Cup of Hockey breaks and stuff. We've had, Four Nations breaks, but it's been forever since we've had a Olympic break that has real ramifications for the season at large, right? Because the trade deadline is going to be in March, and obviously, for many teams, they're going to want to try and get a jump on this. We've already seen a couple of early transactions, Quinn Hughes, Rasmus Anderson, a few others kind of being swapped around. And I think the most important thing is that, the timing for this break kind of sits what I would say are two different trade deadlines, right? So February 3rd, 4th is going to be the first one where teams want to get in before the roster freeze, try and jump the market, maybe anticipate some major injuries, maybe give themselves insurance ahead of that. And then, the actual trade deadline is on March 6th, which is only a couple of days really after the Olympics are over. When you really think about it, the Jets' first game back is on the 25th of February, really just like a week or two before the actual trade deadline. So that's not a lot of time to process big transactions and hit that market hard. So I think this is going to be one of the more interesting TDLs we've seen. The field for the playoffs this year is pretty wide open. Had the Jets actually been in a more competitive spot, this would have been a great year to buy. Instead, the Jets are probably going to have to sell some stuff. Now, sounds like they're not really willing to say that they're throwing the towel on the season and trading a bunch of guys. They may even try to acquire or a player or two just to, maybe have the pretense on paper that they are still trying to stay in the mix, even if that move doesn't really result in more than just a paper transaction, nothing that really moves the needle competitively. But there have been some interesting developments. The first one that I'd say is perhaps the more concerning of the two. Cole Perfetti's name is starting to pop up in trade rumors from Pagnota, and Pagnota has said a lot of this over the past couple of years. Perfetti's name keeps coming up on the block. Nothing has really come out of that, right? This year might actually be a little different. With Perfetti both struggling on paper and with his contract extension looming, with an agency that tends to be really hard. Overhart does not give discounts and has honestly forced out many moves from the Jets before. It's really not easy to see how a relationship like this is going to be mended, right? Perfetti wanted a long-term deal. He didn't get it. And the Jets may feel very right about that, in that he's, not hit all that many points this year, but I look at it as he's doing a lot of the right stuff and maybe not getting rewarded for it. I still see him making tons of defensive plays, tons of really elite forechecking work down low. And so, it's easy to see him going to another team and being, a 50, 60 plus point guy. And it just takes the right line mates for him, right? Somebody who actually can take advantage of his pass first mentality. That may not fit the Jets, and they might be looking to maybe swap him out for a guy that has started to also pop up in trade rumors out of the Kraken, Shane Wright. Wright for Perfetti would obviously take more on Winnipeg's side, I would think. Wright, younger center, he's one of the elite picks of the past couple of years, but I would say an elite pick on paper. His performance in a lot of ways for the Kraken has been, at least on paper, disappointing. But when you dive deeper into what's happened with him, it kind of seems like they're underutilizing him, maybe not giving him enough of a chance. And for one reason or another, he feels that he's kind of seeing the end of his time with the Kraken. So he I wouldn't say he's requested a trade, but his agency has sort of said they are perhaps more open to a move. It seems like Seattle's considering the same thing, but they do still see a lot of value in him. So I would think the Jets would have to add on top of Perfetti to make that sort of deal a reality. Now, how much more would I feel comfortable with the Jets giving up? Wright is obviously a very talented playmaker and somebody that I could see becoming a clear top six center for the Jets. It's also a situation where if they start asking for like first rounders and stuff, I would just say, make sure that this move is the best one you can make with those picks. Next year's Jets first could be on the higher end. Maybe not a lottery pick, but it might still be in the upper half of the first round. That's, I would say, a less likely scenario than a late first. I kind of feel like next year the Jets are going to rebound in a big way, especially compared to this year. But, it is a situation that you have to sort of consider both alternatives, right? Consider that a lot of teams are seeing the Jets fall all the way from first to nearly last. They are going to look at next year's second or well, even the second round pick, but both the first and second as likely bigger assets. So just if you make this move, be smart about it. Make sure that this is the return you think makes the most sense. I think the Jets would be selling low on Perfetti personally. That's where I'm sitting. And that's why I'm not really, eager to do this just yet. I think Wright's a good return, but I don't know that that's what the Jets are going to actually get out of this. So, we'll have to wait and see with this one. I would say it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to try and make this happen right now. But if the Jets are already hearing from Perfetti's agency, they want to move, they're not really looking to re-sign, and Perfetti doesn't feel like this is the fit, okay, then, I understand that it's happened with a couple of players recently. I think it's a worrying trend that's not stopping if that is the case. And I think the Jets really need to ask themselves why yet another player that they've developed wants to leave. So, just a lot of moving parts with this, but it is what it is. Winnipeg has made their decisions before. They're going to have to live with them, and maybe they can come out of this on the winning side, right? We've seen Chevy with his back against the wall come away with really good returns, whether it was McGroarty or Dubois, all that stuff. How they play this going forward is going to be a really important part of helping to redefine the score, right? Perfetti going out is one of your core young pieces that you were planning on being here, leaving yet again. And it's going to force them to have to find a replacement, even if they acquire Wright. Their flanking wing depth is very not good right now, among many other things, right? They don't have a lot of centers that are, high end skill. They don't have a lot of wingers that are high end skill. So they might be starting to run out of talent over the next couple of seasons. But that's why these drafts and trades are going to be really important to help them restock the farm. Elsewhere, the last big trade that I think the Jets are probably thinking about, and one that has started to really crystallize recently, is Logan Stanley. Logan Stanley wants a big extension, and it sounds like the Jets don't really want to follow suit. This is the right choice for both sides. I think Stanley has earned himself a big raise compared to what he had before. I think he's probably gotten himself a long-term deal somewhere, and I don't think it should be the Jets. All due respect to him, he's done a phenomenal job of uncaging himself this year, really trying to be the offensive mastermind that I think he always had within him, but just was never developed that way. Let him find and chase glory somewhere else. The defensive side of his game is still not good enough to be on this Winnipeg back end. And the Jets have left-sided guys like Boumediene who are coming down the pipeline sooner than later. You need spots for them. You've already got Hayden Fleury re-signed too for another season. Make this, a big return. You could probably get a late first for Stanley out of this deal. That would be a huge win given what the Jets have had to give up to keep Stanley over the years. It will not supplant all of the value Winnipeg has lost, but a first in this year's draft coming back, maybe even stuff on top of that, would be a huge way to salvage a situation where, frankly, the Jets were taking on water. It was a sunk cost fallacy, and this could be Winnipeg's way to get it, get some of it back at least. And for Stanley, he gets to go ring chase somewhere. Let him go. He's earned it. Let him, have fun somewhere else. And, he'll probably get a big contract extension either with the team he's traded to or perhaps with a team in free agency that gives him a 4 to 5 year contract. I think it works out well for both teams. I think the Jets get a couple of really badly needed futures. Stanley gets his chance to go be a top paid player and maybe even a top 4 player somewhere else. Good luck to him. I think it makes the most sense. Goodbyes are always bittersweet. I think in my case, I'm okay with this. I think the separation has needed to happen for longer than it's been, but it is what it is. Better to happen now when his value is as high as it's ever going to be than later when he starts to come back down to earth. But would love to hear your thoughts about this. Drop that in the YouTube comments below or at my social medias on Twitter. I want to close out tonight with some quick thoughts from some interesting comments I got and some really good feedback. I want to talk about what we mean when we say we're tanking. I've seen a lot of people say the Jets are not tanking or the players don't quit, and I think there's like a lot of this that I do agree with, and I want to chat about why I still talk about tanking in a brief sec. If you've ever hired somebody who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how damaging that can be. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed's sponsored jobs. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. I used Indeed when I was looking for work myself. The resume builder is comprehensive, and it matched me almost instantly to tons of great job listings that matched both my work experience and my salary requirements. For a business owner, this is the best way to save time and money. Stop wasting time on other job sites. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked on Winnipeg Jets, as we're chatting a little bit about what it means to really tank, right? What do we mean when we say this? Do we mean that we want the players and coaches to quit? Is it the front office? Who is responsible for the tank? I'll say this right now. If the players and coaches quit on the ice or behind the benches, that's a major problem. It is a violation contractually of their responsibilities, and I also think it just sets a bad example. You do not want players and coaches to quit when you are tanking. That is not what they are there to do. They are there to win games. And what you always want to see with these folks is them giving the best effort that they can. And I think in a lot of ways, we often describe this as ethical tanking, right? You give 100%, you try, or at least, 80 to 90%. It doesn't have to be 100% every night. You're going to have off nights here and there. You're going to have games where you're just bad, and it's totally fine. That's happened. That's how it happens in the season. But you always want them to be consummate professionals. And I think for the Jets, that's generally been very true. There have been really no nights this year where you'd say they took it off and quit because they were trying to lose the game. That's not what they're here to do, and it's not what they should do. Anyone who does that should probably be let go. And so I think it's important that people understand that before talking about what tanking is. Tanking is when the roster quality itself simply isn't competitive. And I think the Jets have had a really hard time with that this season. The choices that they made over the summer, they might have framed it as being competitive, and they probably really believe that. But I think a lot of us kind of looked at it with a lot of skepticism. Now, I'll say this, I did not expect it to be this bad. This is worse than I thought it was going to be. And it also had some unlucky moments with injuries, and Hellebuyck not really being Hellebuyck for the past couple weeks. He's had maybe like 2 or 3 games where you're like, that looks like Hellebuyck. But for the most part, he's led in at least 4 to 5 goals every game. That's very unusual by his standards. And some of it's really not his fault. Like, he's trying his best, but the team in front of him has had some really bad defensive lapses, and Helly being even a little bit less than his best is going to lead to a fairly large uptick in goals against. Certainly not in Jennings Trophy territory this season. So, tanking is one of those things where as we start getting closer to the trade deadline, both before and after the Olympics, you'll see Winnipeg likely jettison a couple of veterans. I think they're wanting to cut ties with Nyquist, who really hasn't been a particular difference maker. He was signed to be the Ehlers replacement, but like anyone with common sense knew that was a fool's errand. I did see one person suggest that he's like a 70-plus point player, and like I love your enthusiasm and optimism. I'll say this, he has only been something like that once in the last several years. The Nyquist of Detroit that was a very underrated player, and honestly, one of their better top sixers that really never got credit, that's like a decade ago. Nyquist at this point is a really solid bottom six player. I think he does some surprisingly good work along the walls. His forechecking is good. I thought that he'd be more of a poacher, maybe an opportunist. That really hasn't materialized. For one reason or another, the man is just cursed not to score goals this season. Not entirely in his control, but also, he hasn't really been a game-changing presence. And you add a lot of signings like these, and then you start to trade them out, you'll see maybe the Jets be bad, but faster as more and more kids start filtering into this team. Danny Jokin looks like he can be a solid fourth liner. Brad Lambert could probably eat some minutes in your middle six here, especially once you start trading some guys. And then, you might see a Braden Yeager get some minutes. I don't know. But I think Winnipeg is going to start letting some of the veterans go. We've seen Niederreiter's name pop up in trade rumors. We've seen Nemesnikov's name pop up. I think it is time to start, getting younger. The team is one of the oldest in the NHL. It's one of the slowest in the NHL. It's time to start getting with the times and moving towards a more progressive direction. And in this case, the tanking is just a natural outcome of what has happened with this roster not really being up to NHL modern competitive standards. Is it the worst team ever? I don't think so. I don't think that they're nearly as bad as their record indicates, but they're also not much better than the record indicates. I think that is kind of important to understand on both sides of this. And so, this is really a front office mess that Chevy created. He is responsible for what has happened, and he's going to have to fish this team out of the hole. I don't quite know how he's going to do it, and I have some concerns about some of the moves that they are signaling. I'm a little concerned about what they do with Perfetti, and I hope that they're smart about the Stanley return. This is a very dicey time for the Jets where what Chevy does over the next 3 to 4 months is really going to set the next 5 to 10 years of Jets hockey. If he screws this up, and I don't have a lot of confidence in him right now, this could be a really dire situation. So I'm really hoping for the best. I'm hoping Winnipeg wakes up. I hope that this year was a bit of a slap to the face to tell you, you are not invincible. Time moves on, and so does the rest of the league. Figure that out. Study why those other teams moved ahead and moved past you, and begin to model that same behavior. This turnaround could be a lot faster and a lot more hopeful than what we're seeing with some of the decisions the Jets are talking about. You don't have to tell people that you're quitting, I guess. They're not going to. Apparently, all the way to the end of the year, they're not going to say that this year's lost. But, show us with your moves. Show us what you've learned from what we've seen with this team. Prove to us that you have a vision for how this team can become an elite contender again. Would love to hear your thoughts, though. Where do you think the Jets really need to improve? What is your biggest desire for this team going forward? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's show, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We will see you back here tomorrow with a preview for Winnipeg versus New Jersey. This is going to be, one of the final couple of games the Jets have before they have the Olympic break. 5 games remaining, 5 opportunities for the Jets to either make or break the rest of the season. We will see you there every step of the way. So have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.